All right, we are now live on Facebook, live in our Zoom webinar. Today we've got two lovely experts from Insperity with us for a program called Don't Look Back, You're Not Going That Way. Insperity is supporting this Lunch and Learn webinar produced by Tech United, and we are so excited that they're here with us today. We have an awesome agenda, lots to learn, so I'm going to hand it over very shortly to Bonnie and Enid, who are with us today. Very quickly, for those of you who are new to our webinars, or maybe it's been a while, if you have questions for our lovely guests, put those right in the Q&A. I'll be checking those and then popping up on screen to share any insights or questions. Same thing with the chat. If you'd like to comment on what you're learning here today, you have things to say to the audience, any news to share, if you want to just simply say hello, put those right in the chat. Questions go in the Q&A. This is being recorded as well, so if you'd like to share it with any friends or share it among your company, it'll be available on techunited.co later today, and we'll be sharing the YouTube link with you all shortly as well. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Bonnie and Enid. I would love it if you would just share a little bit about yourselves with our audience before you get into the presentation you've created for us today. Thank you again for joining us.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I know it's good afternoon there. It's still morning here in Texas, but thank you all for joining us. We're very excited about being able to spend some time with you today. My name is Bonnie Monich. I am with Insperity. I am a performance specialist, although I've never really liked that title, so I usually tell people I'm a human capital forensic specialist because it sounds so much better. And it really does describe, to me anyway, what I do with Insperity. Before that, I had my own consulting practice. I've been involved in human resource consulting, mostly at the strategic level, for over 25 years. So I've worked with lots of different size organizations and just about every industry you can imagine, both for-profit and not-for-profit. So I have a lot of experience with people issues. That's really what I work with. How about you, Enid? Why don't you share a little bit about your background with Insperity?
Thank you, Bonnie, and thank you, Jasmine. My name is Enid Mitchell. I am a human resource specialist at Insperity. I've been here just over 14 years, just celebrated that. And what I do is I help my clients with their HR issues. One of them, of course, right now being the focus of COVID-19. But I help with things like employee handbooks and job descriptions and compensation. So that's a large part of my job. And I'm more than happy to be here. I'm hoping that I can convey some information to help you get through this. I know we're looking at 5 months now, and none of us expected to be here, but we're slowly working our way back. And I'm going to say the operative word there is slowly, and we're going to get through this. We just have to have a little bit more patience than we thought we were going to need at the beginning. And I'm very excited to be here and to provide this presentation to you with Bonnie.
Great. Thanks, Enid. Okay, so as you know, the title of this presentation is Don't Look Back because You're Not Going That Way, because it doesn't do us any good to look back, right? We have got to move forward and deal with what we have to deal with right now. So for many of us, it's really not a question of going back to work, as the last few months have been some of the hardest work of our lives, I think, just adjusting to these things and navigating the unexpected. So I think we've all been working, just working differently. But now we're at the beginning of some additional clarity, not completely, but some additional clarity. We certainly have some experience at this particular point in time. And so hopefully soon, I don't know when, but we will begin to move out of this transitional period and try to get ourselves back to what the new normal looks like, what our future looks like. And so it's very important, as we all know, that we have regulations and requirements. We need our employees to be healthy and safe. All of those things are very important. Enid's going to address some of those things for us this morning, as a matter of fact, because they're still very important. The physical health and safety of our employees and our clients are very, very important to everyone. But more than that, there's an emotional toll that has taken place. And that's the part that I really want to talk a lot about today. And so all of us have been through various emotional experiences, right? You have, your employees have, and everybody's different. We're all very unique in our own ways. And so what we're going to do this morning, after taking care of some of the more practical challenges that you have as leaders in your organizations, where they're going to move on to something about emotional intelligence, and then we're going to talk about our culture in this new format, if you will. So let's take a look at really what the agenda is going to be today. We're going to address the return to workplace issues. Some of those, they've changed. Seems like they change every day. So we're going to address that, and it's going to help us with that. Then we're going to talk about leadership and what emotional intelligence is, and why it is so important, especially at this time. How do you handle those employees' emotional needs? Those are the things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about back to basics of your culture. How do you make sure that you are still communicating with actions and words what your culture is in the organization? And we're going to talk about trust. It's more important now than it ever has been from a leadership perspective. So these are the kind of things we're going to address in today's session. So first and foremost, guidelines for opening up America again. These guidelines are basically provided by the CDC, as you can see in the notes at the bottom, broken down into 3 phases. And most all of us have seen these phases for quite a while. And so it is important that we remember that, you know, we do have different phases. Every organization has come up with their own phases, just like Insperity has, any other company. So what I'd like to ask all of you that are sharing this time with us today, as you look at these 3 phases, can you chat for me what phase you are in? Are you in phase 1? Are you in phase 2? Are you in phase 3? Are you somewhere in between? So just put that in your chat for us, if you will, so that we can get a good idea from our audience of where everybody is along the spectrum. And we will we'll come back to this, and we'll be asking Jasmine to tell us what we're hearing in our chat, so that we can get an idea of where you are with this. We want to make sure that we address the needs that you have. I'm going to move on to the next slide, and as we get the chats in, Jasmine, if you'll just let us know where it looks like everybody is as far as phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3.
Sure thing. I've got a couple early answers.
Okay.
If you'd like them. It looks
Sure.
like many are in phase 1, and
Okay.
a few more are actually between 1 and 2. They're exiting 1 and they're making their way into 2, Bonnie. So it seems
Okay.
like the majority of our audience is right in that sweet spot.
Okay, good. That's good. Okay. And I think that's probably where many, many, many organizations are right now. So return of essential and non-essential employees. This was a controversial issue, certainly in the beginning, and that people had lots of questions about how do you classify those people? How do you define them? How do you communicate to people? Is that going to upset someone who feels like, well, what, I'm not essential, but that person's essential? What does that mean? I'm not as important. A lot of those questions were being bantered about, especially early on. And that's something that employers had to be sensitive about, and they weren't accustomed to answering those questions. So you have to remember that people have emotions, and that's why we're having this session today. So we have to address the emotions that people had. Enid, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the things we shared with our clients at Insperity when it came to this whole issue of defining essential versus non-essential, and how you communicate that to those individuals?
Okay. Thanks, Bonnie. Yes, so what you really want to look at is what jobs cannot be done remotely. Obviously, if you've got a manufacturing facility, those employees cannot assemble or do what they need to do or ship out anything because they can't do it from home. Those employees would be deemed essential. You also want to take a look at what the employees do. Where can it be done? I'm an HR specialist. I can work in my office. I can work here at home. I can work at a shore house. I can work at a hotel. My job can still be done without having to physically be in the office. One of my clients, their clients pay them by check. One of their essential employees was the person who had to go in and pick up the mail because those checks needed to be opened, they need to be deposited. So you really need to take a look at what skill that person is doing, what job, and why it cannot be done anywhere else. This is not about performance. If you don't feel that an employee can be trusted to work from home, this is where you're going to have those communications. You're going to have to trust that your employees can work from home. As you bring them back to work, keep in mind you have things like the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. So you cannot say, for example, anybody over 60 can't come back to the office. That's age discrimination. You need to find out who wants to volunteer. You need to get an idea of the head count so you have an idea of how many people are going to be in the office at any given time. Because remember, you've also got capacity issues. You're in a building with elevators. You have to make sure employees can get in and get out. Be flexible with work. That's something else we're going to talk about a little bit later. But you really want to take a look. I always suggest that that my clients go to the CDC website. If they have questions about a legal perspective, outside counsel is always the best place to go. Lots of clients are concerned about getting lawsuits with COVID-19. I think we've heard or at least seen a few in the news. Be prepared for those, but if you pre-plan, you might be able to head those off. Okay.
Right. Thanks, Enid.
Yes.
Good
You're
advice.
welcome.
Okay. So what should employers do if their employees, their kids, the employees' kids, schools are closed? We're all facing that right now. It's a big topic of conversation. So schools are closed maybe, but the employee needs to return to work in order to keep the business going. What's your
Right.
advice there, Enid?
Yeah, so this right now is a bit tricky, and I'll explain why. Let's look at the families first, the federal leave, the emergency federal leave that provided for a percentage of income for parents whose children were home because schools were closed. The maximum amount of time on that was up to 12 weeks. So schools closed in March, there's a really good chance that parents that took advantage of it are out of time by now. This is where the flexible planning has to come into view. For example, can your employees answer emails and do what they need to do earlier or later in the day? Can they do it at 6 a.m., maybe 6 to 8? If their child has to do homeschooling, they set them up, they get them settled. Maybe they can intermittently answer emails. They'll need to be flexible scheduling meetings and being on meetings, but see how flexible you can be. Everybody here has probably sent an email at like 5 or 6 because you couldn't sleep. There's no reason why that can't be done now unless it's prohibitive for the clients that you're working with or other teams. So try to be flexible with the ability for the hours that an employee works. I know that I have coworkers who go home at 3 o'clock. Well, pre-COVID, they'd go home at 3 o'clock. They'd pick up their kids. They'd, let them do their homework, have them dinner, get them ready for bed. And then they would work from like 8 until 10 or 11 to take up for those 3 hours that they were out of the office. So be flexible. You also have states that have regulations, lots of states that come out with paid sick leave. Other states have now come out with all kinds of family leave. You need to make sure that you are compliant with these leaves because this will definitely get you a lawsuit if you say, no, you have no sick time, but the state allows an employee to take 5 days. So definitely want to look at that information to find out what leaves the employee might be eligible for. What we're trying right now to do is not move right to, if you can't work, we're going to terminate. Let's be flexible. That's what we're going to have to do right now. We're not looking back. We may never be normal, quote unquote, normal again. So we need to be flexible, and this is the time to do it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So now that we've addressed some of the practical issues, not all, but some of the practical issues, let's move on to the emotional needs that each and every employee has, and so do employers. So we all have needs. And that's all about something we call emotional intelligence. And I like to remind people that emotional intelligence is not the opposite of intelligence. And so it's not the triumph of heart over head. People get a little nervous about it. It's really the intersection of both of those things. And so we're going to talk about emotional intelligence for a little while today. And it's not often addressed. So why is it so important anyway? What's the big deal? Sometimes I have a client saying, what's the big deal? Everybody's talking about emotional intelligence. So what's so important about it? Well, we have learned that emotional intelligence is essentially an ability, a capacity, or a skill really to assess, manage, and regulate the emotions of yourself and others. Managing emotions is challenging. So why is it such a big deal? Well, the lack of it is what's a big deal. The lack of emotional intelligence limits you in life is what happens. It limits you in life. If you can't manage your emotions, you can crumble, you can snap under stress, right? And we are all under stress right now. And I promise you, your employees are under stress right now as well. So you can't respond most effectively when you are under stress and you do not have control of your emotions. So that's why it is a big deal. And for leadership, it is absolutely critical at this particular point in time. Emotional intelligence, in my opinion, picks up where intelligence leaves off. So to put it another way, I think we've all heard the expression, no one cares how much you know until they first know how much you care. Probably all of us have heard that. And it is very, very true. So what is the most important characteristic that distinguishes great leaders? I get this question a lot. I work a lot with leadership teams, and we talk about these types of things. So, what is it? What would you think it is? So some of you, please put in chat just with one word. What would be the word that you would say is the characteristic that you'd believe distinguishes great leaders? Start putting that in chat. And Jasmine, as you get those coming in, share them with us.
Will do. Keep an eye on it right now.
Okay. All right. Because we hear all kinds of different things and answers to this question. And so I'm always interested to hear what other people believe the most important characteristic is for great leaders.
So far, I'm seeing flexible.
Flexible, there you go.
Confidence, communication, overall
Yes.
communication, authentic communication, and leading with empathy.
Yeah, empathy. And that's what emotional intelligence is all about, empathy.
Absolutely.
So just so you know, research shows that emotional intelligence, EI or EQ as it's known, accounts for nearly 90% of what sets high performers apart from others with similar technical skills and knowledge. That is a big number, 90%. And so that is why emotional intelligence is very, very important. It really is at the core of any behavioral shift or change that you have to make. We certainly are in one of those now. So that's something to keep in mind. And I always like to talk about, that I think some people have certainly read the book by David Goleman, who is a psychologist. He was really the first to establish the importance of emotional intelligence connected to leadership in an organization. So leaders with emotional intelligence, they're also better equipped to handle conflicts and provide resolution. That's what's going on right now. There's a big correlation between a high level of emotional intelligence and effective leadership. Studies have been done time and time again that have proven this out over and over again. Having knowledge, smarts, as we say, and vision are also important to any leader. But what really distinguishes the world's most successful leaders is emotional intelligence, or the ability to identify and monitor emotions of themselves and others. That's really what it's all about. So basically, when we're happy, we build rich work-related knowledge, skills, and abilities. So that's what emotional intelligence is. I had a great example, but I'm not going to share it with you. I want to make sure we get through the session. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. So emotional intelligence is knowing how we and others feel, why we feel that way, and knowing what can be done about it. That's one of the keys, right? What can be done about it? It is the ability to understand and use the power of emotions wisely. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So, emotional intelligence, where does it show up? We talk about things like adaptability, right? That's an important skill that any leader should have in a new or changing environment. We certainly have that right now. The capacity for knowledge and the ability to acquire it. The capacity for reason and abstract thought. The ability to comprehend relationships. The ability to evaluate and to judge, and the capacity for original and productive thought. These are the critical components for successful leadership and how emotional intelligence ties into that. So a lot of people get uncomfortable when they talk about emotions. I don't want to be at the mercy of my emotions, people say. I want to use them, to enjoy them, and to dominate them. That's what Oscar Wilde said. And so that would be the ideal thing that we could all do. So you think about yourself and you're growing up, right? How and when did we learn about emotions and how we felt about emotions? Who taught us that? We ask us those questions. What are our blind spots when we're doing self-assessments with regards to that? Feel free to chat on how you learned about emotions. If you'd like to share with us, be brave and share. When did you learn about emotions? Who are the influencers in your life that began to show you how you handled emotions, if you showed emotions? So share with us, if you will, some of the things that you've learned about emotions, or where your comfort level or discomfort level might be with regards to emotions, because this is something that some people are uncomfortable with, and we need to address it.
As these come in here, we did get a few questions in the Q&A as well about emotional intelligence. If you want to answer those, maybe.
Sure, absolutely.
I'll go backwards. Someone asked, how do you practice emotional intelligence when remote? So much of it is you pick up on the physical cues and the language and the
yeah.
How do you do it?
Yeah. Well, it certainly is a challenge, right? It is a challenge for us when we are not in the room, because we do, when we think about communication as a whole, 60% of our communication is nonverbal. So it does offer a challenge to us, right? When we're not in the room with people, we really can't see their eyes or their expressions that well. Yes, you can do it on video, so you can see me here, but you can't really look into my eyes and really get that feel. Some people are comfortable on video and audio, and they can show their emotions by the way they speak, their tone, the cadence that they use when they speak. Other people not. They're very monotone, or they're afraid to really communicate virtually. So that is a challenge. So how do you do it? How do you practice? You practice by actually doing it by trying to be yourself as much as you can when you're on video and audio with your colleagues, with your employees. Try to use humor. Try to make sure that they see that you're a real person and that you have challenges as well. Be vulnerable with people. If you're having a bad day and things haven't been working that morning, why don't you share it with everybody on that call? They would be a lot more comfortable if they knew that, yep, you have those problems yourself. So be vulnerable. It builds trust very quickly. And you've just got to learn to talk with more emotion, to emphasize things more that mean a lot to you.
If I could add something, Bonnie?
Sure.
Try asking open-ended questions. Don't ask, how are you doing? Because if you've got kids, you know they're going to say fine, and then they get a D on their report card. Ask an open-ended question. Let's share what we did today. You know, one thing that went well, one thing that didn't. That will sometimes help you understand what your employers are going through. If you have an employee that doesn't want to share, you might want to have a one-on-one conversation with them, not because they didn't share, but because the fact that they didn't want to could mean they're going through something.
Absolutely.
And what do you feel about, I know many companies have been instituting either video happy hours or video open sessions where you're gathering as a company, but you're not allowed to talk about work. Do you feel like makes sense in this situation to still provide that time where you can be together as a group, but not be so focused on deadlines and projects and emails? Is that something that you all recommend?
Absolutely. And matter of fact, we're going to talk about that later on in the presentation about some suggestions that we have for companies to try to have more casual gatherings, if you will, virtually. So yes, that is very helpful, and it is needed. It is needed. But you know, it really brings me to, we have there's a PDF handout that I think you're going to distribute after the session, right? And it's about soul words. So there are words that you can actually use if you feel uncomfortable with this whole emotional intelligence thing. We have a handout for you that we like to call soul words. And there's some, it gives you the definition of certain terms and words that you can use that others do associate with that have to do with emotions. And so people that want to practice sometimes need resources just like that. So we'll be handing that out as well.
Excellent. And I think I might know the answer here, but the biggest factor in emotional intelligence, I would imagine, is time. It's observation, it's practice, I imagine it's not something you can just wake up one day and you're just the most amazing, emotionally intelligent person, right? I mean, maybe you are, Bonnie, but the rest of us have to work for it.
It is a skill. That's the good news, right? We're not just born with it. So it is a skill. And so with every skill, any skill, it takes practice. That's exactly right. And in the beginning, it feels awkward and uncomfortable, but the more you practice, the more comfortable you get. And the more you get some positive feedback, things are happening the way you would like them to. People are warming up. You're getting more information out of your employees. You'll know that, okay, I must be doing something right. I'm going to continue to do that. I'm going to do that again and again and again if I can. So that's what happens, yes. Practice makes perfect, as they say.
Of course. Okay.
For sure.
Thank
so
you.
We practice. Any other questions?
Well, I think you're going to get to this, and you've already started a little bit, but we did have a question just about how to encourage emotional intelligence, both in company culture and within the leadership team. Because sometimes it comes top bottom, and other times it's bottom to top, and that's two different ways of looking at it.
Boy, you bet it is. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. Absolutely. Okay, cool. So, do you think your emotional education is adequate, right? We were just talking about that. It takes practice. So chat your responses and thoughts. Do you think your emotional education is adequate? Yes or no? We'd like to know. Don't be afraid. So we say that people who have had emotional educations, they usually don't avoid conversations. So they encourage conversations, and they're comfortable with emotions. If someone's crying, if someone's angry, if someone's sad, those types of things. So the question for you is, what can you do to educate? Well, the first step is doing something like this. You're here, right? You're here, aren't you? So you're going through a session like this. That's one of the things you can do. You can certainly purchase books on emotional intelligence that have many, many exercises in them. At Insperity, we have courses on emotional intelligence. I'm sure you can find courses on emotional intelligence. Those are the kinds of things you can do. You can read and build your vocabulary, and that's what that addendum is going to be, that describe feelings and get comfortable describing feelings. But if you don't practice, you're going to remain uncomfortable. So you have to practice. You can learn strategies really to regulate feelings and emotions as well as a leader. And many times you have to do that. Every employee is watching and observing what you're doing, what you are saying, and how you're reacting to it. So you are the model, and all eyes are on you as a leader. So it's important that you yourself get comfortable with emotional intelligence. So try using some of those soul words that we're going to distribute later. I think after the session's over, we're going to distribute these soul words. They have the words and the definitions. Practice using some of those words. You can practice on your family. They might think you're crazy, but practice on your family. I always practice everything on my family. Or if you don't want to practice on your family, you can practice on your dog. They always want to hear what you have to say, and they're not too critical of you. So these are the kinds of things that you can do. So we're going to be distributing those soul words. Make sure you use some of them. Try them out. Just try them on for size, we always like to say.
By
So
the
what?
way, some of the chat answers were yes, but could be better. We got a lot of it could be better. We got one very honest no, and we got a few that are saying yes due to mentors and advocates and folks in their network, colleagues who I guess have helped build that emotional intelligence.
You cannot beat trusted advisors, right? Somebody you trust, they can share with you, be honest with you. You can't beat that. That is a great suggestion, a good idea.
Absolutely.
So emotional intelligence, you know, what is it not, right? It's not being nice. This is what a lot of people think, right? Letting it all hang out. No, that's not emotional intelligence. It's not gender-based, by the way. Women are not necessarily emotionally smarter than men. I hear that a lot. Men will say to me, it's just more natural for women. That's not true. It's not fixed genetically. And guess what? Emotional intelligence is not being emotional. And sometimes that alone makes someone not want to be better at emotional intelligence, which is kind of crazy, right? If you think about it. But I know we've all heard of these things. Good leaders. What do good leaders do? Well, guess what? The speed and the scope of the coronavirus crisis has posed extraordinary challenges for leaders. And so it's easy to understand why so many have missed opportunities to have decisive and honest communication. That's what good leaders do. They are transparent, and it is so important. Just like some other things, I think leadership weaknesses are being exposed right now. That's what's happening. Some of your managers, for example, might be having challenges managing virtually. They're accustomed to managing people in the office, but now all of a sudden it's very awkward for them to try to manage virtually, and things are not going as well as maybe they did when they were managing people face-to-face. Those are challenges as leaders you have to address, and you have to help your managers with those things. So these are different things. These are hard choices that every manager and leader is facing today. How they're going to manage virtually is awkward to many, many people. And there are a lot of courses people can take. There are books, obviously, you can read. There are a lot of things you can do to practice getting more comfortable with leading virtually. There are many, many sessions out there. But I think it's a mistake to think that failures of leadership are all we can expect during this time of extreme volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. That's not true. Managers and leaders can rise to the occasion. This is a time they can really grow from a development perspective, and that's what I work a lot with our clients on, leadership development. This is a time that you can really develop as a leader. It is an opportunity. And so I would talk to my leaders about that it is an opportunity. It's a challenge, but a great opportunity to get better and better with your emotional intelligence, with your people skills, as we like to call them. But we do want to focus on good leaders here. What do good leaders do? Those are the people that set the tone, right? Everybody's looking and watching. They model the behaviors. They build the trust that is needed. Right now, people need to trust you. Trust is extremely important. That's what energizes people. That's what moves them to engagement. We talk about employee engagement a lot. That's what engages employees. So trust is extremely important. You have to meet that other person's needs. So those are the kinds of things that are important right now. Emotional intelligence really falls into these 4 competencies, basically. Self-awareness, self-management, relationship management, and social awareness. The top 2, those have to do with you. Those are the things you can study. Those are the things you can control, that you can get better at. You can assess yourself honestly and openly. The bottom 2 have to do with others. So now we're dealing with your employees, with your managers. You need to ask yourself some honest questions about where you're at with regards to how well you do these 4 competencies. So what's the most challenging for you? You need to ask yourself that. I apologize for my dogs, as you can hear them in the background. This is what happens when we're in a virtual world. So I apologize for that in advance.
All good.
So think about these. You don't want to say, oh, I've got all this to think about. Pick one of these 4. Pick one of these 4 that you know you need to do some work on. Maybe you hate looking at yourself, self-assessments, those types of things. Maybe you just don't like to do those types of things. If that's the way you feel, that's the one you ought to work on. If managing yourself is a challenge, and you know it is, that's the one you need to work on. If you know that you need to get better at relationship management, especially in this time when you're doing everything almost virtually and remote, it's an additional challenge. Then work on that one. Our social awareness, if maybe you just kind of stay in your shell and you don't really pay too much attention about what else is going on out there, get out of that shell more. Ask those open-ended questions like Enid said. Get some information, get some input. So challenge yourself to work on one of these. That's what I challenge you to do. So before we move on to the next topic of culture, I like to have a little humor. So this is one of my favorite things that Steve Martin said. Before you criticize a man, walk a mile in his shoes. That way, when you do criticize him, you'll be a mile away and you'll have his shoes. So we do need to use humor, right? Everybody needs humor sometimes. So don't forget to make sure you use humor when you're dealing with your employees. Everybody needs to laugh, especially now, right?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about culture. Now more than ever, your culture is important. So the new normal is now remote. It's virtual work for 62% of the US working population. And some studies are showing us it's growing, not getting smaller. And also, by the way, there's a pretty good chance that even after we get through this crisis and we try to go back to the new normal, you're going to have a lot more people working remotely because people found out they could do it successfully. You could still be engaged. It was effective. And so I think we're going to see a lot more remote working when we do return back to the new normal. So virtual is important. It's going to continue to be important. So you need to rethink your culture as you look at those kinds of things. Teams and organizations that once connected, basically, very frequently in person, they're now dispersed. They're working everywhere. Individually in an uncertain and evolving climate. That's an added stress to everybody, to all of us. This shift is going to challenge your culture. It's going to challenge your values that you put in place. They're going to become much more important in the process. So a strong, consistent culture is not easy to create during normal work circumstances, I have to say. Did you know that only 23% of U.S. employees strongly agree that they can apply their organization's values to their work every day before COVID? That was before COVID. And I know when I've gone into organizations and I've talked about values, I've asked people, okay, what are the values of your organization? Many people don't know what they are. I mean, they can't recite them. They may be on the wall in the kitchen area or maybe in the entry area, but they don't really think about them very much. And so that's really more what I'm talking about. Workplace culture is inherently a social construct. You have to remember that. It is a social construct. It is, in slang terms, what I like to say is how we do things around here. I work with organizations all the time to help them build their mission, vision, values, which then creates their culture. And I often share with them because you can overcomplicate that whole process. And I say, basically, how do you do things around here? Tell me how you do things around here. And then people say, okay, here's how we do things around here. Well, that's the beginning of being able to describe a culture and implement a culture too. Now, a vast majority of organizations, of course, part of their culture has to do with face-to-face, right? It does, but now we're not face-to-face anymore. So it's changed completely. So those norms are at risk right now. And you can't forget about your culture during this time. Some people have put it on the back burner. That's not the thing to do right now. In a remote, socially isolated working environment, our online working culture will take a much more critical role than ever before, I think. So I like what Herb Keller said. He said, culture is what people do when no one's looking. And I love that definition because that is indeed when you know you have communicated and embedded your culture in your organization. When your employees, what they're doing is when nobody's looking and it matches what your values are. That's very, very important. So what's culture anyway? The system of shared beliefs and values that develops within an organization and guides the behavior of its members. It's our company's internal compass for the most part. That's what we like to say about culture. So chat for me, put in chat, give me one word, just one word that you feel defines the culture of your company. Just one word, just pick one. Put it into chat. Share that with us. Let us know what your cultures are. We love to hear those kinds of things.
I'm going to give it a minute to let them roll in. The first two we've gotten are collaborative, supportive. Oh, we're getting engaging, driven, integrity. I'm going to let them keep rolling in, but those are the couple that we've gotten thus far. Diversity, paternalistic.
There you go. You can take one word, just one word. Most people have several values listed in their culture, but you can take that one word description and it can say a lot, right? So take that one word and think, okay, how do I make sure that is embedded right now in this new situation that we have working in a remote environment? How am I making sure that I'm reinforcing that one word? That's the challenge I place to you today.
Absolutely.
This is the time, by the way, as leaders, to really review. This is a good time to do it. Review your mission, your vision, and your values. That's what creates cultures, as I mentioned. This is the time to do it. If you haven't done it in a couple of years, it's time. A lot of our clients will have us come in every year, refresh mission, vision, values. Some organizations have never gone through this process, a formal process. They may have come up with some values, but you really need to go through this exercise and really get a good foundation going. So if you've never done it, now's the time to do it. If you haven't reviewed this in the last couple of years, it's time to do a refresher.
And is that something you recommend doing with the whole organization? You start with a brainstorm with just leadership? I know we've got about 10 minutes left here, but I'm just interested to hear how you go about that. What's worked for you?
Okay, the process that I use with our clients is first we start with the executive leadership team, with the mission, vision, value, identifying all three of those. That is a very comprehensive process. It takes several sessions,
Or
but I like to start at the top because typically leadership in an organization really creates what the mission, vision, and those values need to be for that organization. Once that's completed, and we've got some beginning, we've got a beginning mission statement, a beginning vision statement, and we have the beginning of values from leadership's perspective, then what I do is I will have breakout sessions with various employees all over an organization, and I will do a session with all of them. It's an open brainstorming session. I don't tell them what the leadership came up with first. So I take them through that process as well. Then we blend the two together because it is important for employees to feel like they participated in that process. It really helps with buy-in
I'm sure.
in the
And
whole
that's got to be
organization.
a little emotional intelligence weaved in there too, right? The
Yep,
listening,
absolutely.
understanding.
Absolutely. So that's the way I do this process with our clients at Insperity. And it's very valuable to every organization that goes through it. In the beginning, they usually don't know what they signed up for, but they're very happy after we have completed that process.
I'm sure.
So, um, so purpose and values, you know, you want to talk about those things. And managing business continuity, make sure you communicate your actions in a way that is consistent with your values, always. Demonstrate values with your employees. Talk about these things, even in a virtual setting. Give examples of maybe somebody demonstrated a value in the organization. Let them share what that was. Ask them, you know, somebody tell me about, you know, a situation that you've handled recently that demonstrated one of our values. Tell us about it. What was it like? Those are the kinds of things you can start doing with your employees in a virtual setting. These are the kinds of things that build the values into the process. Make sure you reinforce them. When we're all in an office together, we're working together, it's a little easier to see actions that have to do with our values. It's more difficult virtually. So you're going to have to encourage conversations about that to make sure that's happening. Otherwise, nobody will think about it. And then you'll all go back to work and you'll have this big blank space that happened. So that's important that you do that. Motivating your employees, more important than ever now. It is all a part of culture, is motivation. And studies show us that for the most part, when you look at motivation and you're thinking about your employees, you should look at these four components. Hope, people want hope. They especially need it now. Compassion, that's emotional intelligence. Stability, people are scared. It's an uncertain time. You have to bring some certainty of some kind. Whatever it is you can do, you need to share that certainty with them. Be transparent. And then trust. Extremely important. We've talked about it already. Trust is very important for leadership. If you are not vulnerable, you haven't built trust. Your employees need to trust you now more than ever for direction. So these 4 components are extremely important. Hope is excitement about a better future. You've got to find the positive and talk about it. It's there. You got to find it. Compassion, an understanding of other people, of how they feel, what's on their mind. Knowing that you're listening, just if they know you're listening, is a big plus. Stability. Employees want to know that some things, maybe not everything, will be consistent. So anywhere you can keep consistency, that's what you need to do in this time. And trust, belief that words connect to action. Words connect to action. Those words of value come to life in actions. Those are the 4 things that you can do. Here's some other ideas that we did put together for you that I mentioned. You have to continue with creative messaging. There are a lot of different things you can do. You can share updates, reinforce values, information, as well as inspiration. You can do both, right? Every time you communicate, you have the opportunity to reinforce your values, which demonstrate your culture in every way. So you need to be top of mind about that as you're communicating. And you also have the opportunity to inspire. Inspiring your employees is very important. Motivating them. Remember, we talked about hope earlier, so people need to have hope, and you can find some for them. Maybe you could, have some spotlight and celebrations virtually. New hires and employee anniversaries, you can still celebrate those virtually, and you should. So remember, that's that continuity that I talked about, the consistency that you can offer. This is an area that you can offer that consistency. Accomplishment of team goals and achievements. All those things you did before, you can still do them, and you need to do them, but you must do them differently, right? Look at it as a challenge. Look at it as some fun, having some fun. You can have, you can encourage social connections. Jasmine, you mentioned this. Should you do something fun? Yeah, you need to do something fun. You can have happy hour. You can have coffee, talks. You can have some little separate clubs if you want. You must, of course, keep inclusion and diversity in mind. That's important today. I think that's something that all of us have been certainly talking about recently. Enid, is there anything from an HR perspective you want to talk about with diversity and inclusion?
Sure. Thanks. Yes, you want to reach out to your employees to see what their ideas are. I have a couple of clients that have decided to call Columbus Day Indigenous Persons Day. It's not really called Columbus Day anymore. Find out what your employees are interested in, especially now. Make sure, however, that you are not excluding any particular group or person from these activities. Invite everybody. They don't have to attend, but invite everybody. Be careful the conversations that are had. They still need to be reasonably related to business and social and appropriate conversations. But feel free to have those, and Insperity has them. In fact, I have one scheduled at 2 o'clock. It's a virtual coffee break. We have games. We play Kahoot. If anybody is familiar with Kahoot, it's a perfect way to do these kinds of things. We've played Trivial Pursuit, or things that you can do virtually. Yeah. So keep those things in mind. Just try to make sure that they're appropriate for the workplace. Even though people are sitting at home right now, this is still a workplace issue, a workplace activity. It still needs to be appropriate for the workplace.
And keep in mind those values. Make sure you're enforcing your values while you're choosing whatever those activities are. You can also leverage employee groups. And many organizations do have them. You can do volunteer activities. We're doing one right now at Insperity. These are things you can you can all do. Also, people can share what they're doing as far as service. What are they volunteering doing? What are they doing, you know, at their church or what have you? These are things you can do. What are you doing? I have in here, send us your ideas in chat, but I know we're running on short on time. I like this quote by Henry Kissinger: the historic challenge for leaders is to manage the crisis while building the future. You can't forget about the future. The future's coming. Trust is important, right? Trust is extremely important to all of us. And so these are the 4 areas of trust. I know we're running short on time. I'm going to go through it a little bit quickly. So these are the areas that you can, you know, break down trust into these categories and think about them for yourself. That's also important. Consider creating a space to talk about COVID. This is one thing that's really been beneficial. Initially, a lot of people were afraid to talk about it, I think, and nobody really wanted to share much of what was going on in their own personal lives, right? It was like, I don't want to talk about, you know, whether my aunt was sick or what. Everybody was afraid to speak. And so you can actually create a space to talk about COVID, non-judgmental, you know, confidential. Just let people share how they're feeling. And what's making them feel that way is extremely important. You know, culture always matters. It really does, but it matters more now than ever. That's the big message that I want to leave all of you with here. So I know we don't have a lot of time for questions. Jasmine?
We do have a few leftover questions.
Okay.
I might also roll them over and shoot them to you via email and add them into a blog post along with a recap video, just in case we don't have time. The one that I wanted to touch back on that I think you might be able to answer quickly is, what have you seen recently? What of the companies that you've worked with since March have you felt were very successful adapting to remote work, adapting to a virtual environment, staying emotionally intelligent, making that transition? Like, what have you seen that you really thought worked well and were happy to see transition so smoothly?
I think that in the beginning, there was so much information coming at leadership, managers. It was just coming from every direction. They were just confused about what they should be, you know, should they watch this webinar, that webinar, read this article, or what have you. And I think that just having a trusted advisor that could help them go through all of the information that was coming in and then determine which one of those pieces of information would be most valuable to their organization. That was extremely important early on, for sure. And so having that trusted advisor, somebody that could help guide you. In other words, don't leave it all on your shoulders. Many organizations will have outside groups, maybe CEO groups of various organizations, and they meet together and they help one another, right? They coach each other. They share their own problems. Those are extremely important right now. So I encouraged all of our clients that were a member of something like that to be very active during the time. And those that weren't a member, find a group that they could join. So listening to your colleagues like that at that level, because when you are a CEO or COO, you're kind of lonely, right? It's lonely at the top. And you certainly don't want to share with your colleagues or your employees about some of the unique challenges that you feel you're having. So you need someone else to share that with, someone else that direct you to what you might need to be doing. And then the other things were to accept, just take a breath and accept that your managers may not be that skilled in managing remote right now. This is brand new. Go ahead and accept that everybody was fumbling around with virtual meetings, right? Just accept it. Take a breath, accept it, and then dig in there and figure out how to figure it out. It's okay to be vulnerable. Everybody was vulnerable during that time. So from a people perspective, those are the kinds of coaching sessions that I had with my clients, because there were so many resources coming at them. It was difficult to even think about what you should do.
Got it. Well, I appreciate that insight. We actually have a group for our CEOs to come together and discuss things like that. We have similar ones for entrepreneurs who have their own set of CEO, but also self-owned sort of problems. And we've had some of those discussions as well. And I can definitely agree with you that that can be really helpful just to go to someone outside of the inner circle and the bubble of your, like, staring into your computer for 8 hours a day.
Yes.
So that's really great advice. I'm excited that we've recorded this because I think it'll be awesome for us to share with our entire Tech United membership. It's thousands of companies in the region who I know would benefit from hearing what each of you had said. I know we're running a few minutes over. Do either of you have any closing remarks or any closing statements before we end today's webinar?
I do. Just remember to be empathetic right now. Like I said earlier, you need to be patient, work with your employees, find out why they're reticent about coming back to work. If you have an employee assistance program, reach out, let your employees know about that. If they need counseling services, a lot of people, I myself am single, so I'm home by myself, although I do have a cat. But you're home by yourself, you don't see another human being. If you don't go out of the house, they might need the EAP. Childcare. If we're looking at the end of summer, so summer camp isn't an issue right now, but is there something I can do with my child if the child has to work remotely, or what do I have to do these next couple of months until we figure out whether the children are going back to school or working from home? Go through the EAP for that. A lot of them have counseling services. It may dovetail with the medical insurance, so please take advantage of that. This is something that happened. We didn't expect to be here as long as we have been, and it's uncertain. So we're not looking back. Star Trek, the new frontier, the final frontier, we're in a new one now as well. We need to figure out how to go forward, moving forward.
Yeah. And I would just add, in this new frontier that we have, I like that term. This is really, I know some people roll their eyes when I say this, but this is a great opportunity. There are such interesting challenges that we have right now. And all of us are very, very creative. We can figure this out. We can see whatever that silver lining is. There is one there. Believe me, it's hard to see day in and day out, but it is there. I mean, these are some unique challenges. We can all rise to the occasion. And what a wonderful opportunity to develop yourself, right? To learn to do something new. You were kind of forced into it, but you learned to do something new, to get better at something that you knew you were kind of weak in. This is a great opportunity to do that. And so I just like people to remember that there are some positive, good things that we can focus on in going through this, and help each other out. That's all. That's what it's all about. Just help each other out.
Well, I appreciate those final words of wisdom. I'm pulling up our screen here so everyone can remember to go to techunited.co and insperity.com to learn more. Thank you both so much again for joining us today. I know I speak for myself and some of the folks that chatted me individually, but this was truly a pleasure to host you. I learned a lot. It seems our audience did as well. I'm looking forward to sharing your PDF with everyone afterward. If you want me to share slides or you'd like to share slides, we'd welcome that as well. Of course, they're here in the recording. But I just want to thank you both again for taking time out of your days to spend it with us. And we'll see you soon.
Okay.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. Take care and be safe.
Take care. And thank you to the Insperity team.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.